Welcome to EPISD's Digital Discoveries, exploring the world of education technology in the El Paso Independent School District.
Hi, welcome to this segment of Digital Discoveries. For the last few segments, we've been looking at the new technology application TEKS. We looked at just an overview, an introduction to the technology application TEKS. We looked at the 6 strands that make up the technology application TEKS. And in this segment, we're going to look at the actual TEKS themselves and how to read the TEKS. Now, I know that most of our teachers understand TEKS. They know how to read TEKS. And so when you're looking at the TEKS, you're going to say, man, this is so familiar. And that's a good thing to have. That's a good piece of information to have, because all the TEKS, even the technology TEKS, are all written in a very similar format. So for most of you, this will be kind of a review of the TEKS. But for also a lot of you, this is the new technology application TEKS, which we're not familiar with. So we're going to walk through them. We're going to look at all these different things that are available, and hopefully by the end of this segment you'll have a better understanding of the TEKS. Now, if you want to follow along and you want to grab your own copy of the technology application TEKS, there's a copy online at this website. It's epsilon.com/grp/TEKS Group. Now, for those of you, you're like, what is that? That's a Project Share group. So if you're not familiar with Project Share, you haven't logged into Project Share yet, that's a way to get you into Project Share. So if you want to grab a copy of the TEKS and you want to stop the video right now, go grab a copy and then come back, that's fine too. So that's all right to do. So follow along if you want. You can have your hard copy if you want. And so let's go ahead and get going. Today when we look at the TEKS, we're going to look at 5 different things in the TEKS. We're going to look at the introduction statements. We're going to look at how those strands are woven in to each TEKS. We're going to look at the knowledge and skill statements. What are those knowledge and skill statements? We're going to look at the student expectations, and finally we're going to conclude today with the including statements. Now, what's really neat about the TEKS is that if you understand how to read the technology application TEKS, you also understand how to read all TEKS, because all the TEKS in Texas have they have an introduction, they have strands, they have knowledge and skill statements, they have those students' expectations, and they have those including statements. So if you understand those in the technology application TEKS, you also understand them for every single other TEKS. So these are a general overview of how to read those TEKS. So let's look at the introduction statement. Let's look at what is that introduction statement that every single TEKS has. So this is, it's like, whoa, that's a lot of information on one slide there. This is just the introduction for the grades 3-5 technology application TEKS. And for most of today's segment, we're going to be looking at the grades 3-5. But just be aware that this also works for all the other TEKS. So this also works for the grades K2 TEKS. And this also works for all the middle school TEKS. So I kind of pulled out 3-5 because it's kind of in the center there. And so this works K-8. All the things that we're talking about are in each one of the TEKS. So we're going to look at the introduction statement. And they're the same in every single one. There's 3 parts of it. Let's walk through it and see what it is. So this first part is talking about where the TEKS come from. It's kind of a little history lesson. And it talks about the strands that are in the TEKS. So this is kind of the basic background. That first paragraph is the basic background information about the TEKS. The second paragraph talks about some more specific student expectations. If the students get through these TEKS and we teach the students what are in these TEKS, then this is what they'll learn. These are the things that our students will learn if they get through these TEKS. We teach them like we're supposed to. We embed them into our lessons. We integrate them in with all our core curricular lessons. This is what they'll learn. And then finally, that last statement there at the bottom gives us a little how to read the TEKS a little bit. What are the including statements? What are the such as statements? And so that last statement kind of is made just for the teachers, saying, look, here's where we're asking the students to do specific things. And so that top one is an introduction, kind of a background. The second one is what the students will get out of these TEKS, and that third paragraph there talks about how to read the TEKS a little bit, including that including statement. We're going to talk about that including statement in just a second. So the first thing we want to do, we cover the introduction, so that's out of the way, it's good. Now we want to talk about the knowledge and skills statement. Each one of the strands has a knowledge and skills statement. And a lot of teachers know this as the K&S statement, the knowledge and skills statement. So if you ever see in writing something that says the KS statement, that's what it's talking about in TEK vernacular, the knowledge and skills statement. So let's look at a typical knowledge and skill statement, and we'll dissect it and take it apart and look at the parts that are in it. So this is again taken from the 3rd through 5th grade TEKS, technology application TEKS, and each one of the strands starts off with a knowledge and skills statement. So this is the second strand, and we're going to take it apart here, but you notice that the knowledge and skills statement always introduces the strand. So let's look at that one right up there at the top. I just grab that, and the first part is the strand itself. So this strand, creativity and innovation, that's the first part that introduces that whole set of TEKS in this knowledge and skill statement. So you know that everything underneath that is in the creativity and innovation strand. The second sentence, or the second part of the knowledge and skill statement, is the actual knowledge and skill statement. The student uses creative thinking and innovative processes to construct knowledge and develop digital products. So that's the second part. That's the knowledge and skills statement part of the strand. And each one of these is exactly the same. Each one of the TEKS, when they go to each strand, has that knowledge and skill statement that introduces the whole rest of the strands underneath that. And so then the last part of this knowledge and skill statement, it says the student is expected to. And so that's where you know that the student expectations are beginning to start up. The student is expected to, and then after that we get all the exact student expectation statements. So this is how a knowledge and skills statement is broken down for every single one of our TEKS. It starts off with the strand. In this case, it's the creativity and innovation strand. It has then followed by the exact knowledge and skills statement. The student uses creative thinking and innovative processes to construct knowledge and develop digital products. Notice that it's very vague, it's very general. The knowledge and skills statement is always very, very general. It's kind of the overarching kind of description of what's to follow down in the student expectations. And then that final part of that statement is the student expectation. That's kind of the student is expected to, and after that comes the actual student expectations. So let's look at some of these just so you can see that they're all exactly the same. And so I want to point out over here on this camera that you can see that these are all the student expectations for grades 3 through 5. These are all the, not the student expectations, the knowledge and skills statements. So we have creativity and innovation. Notice that it says the student uses creative, that we have this introductory, this explains the knowledge and skills statement, and then they always end with the student is expected to. Second strand, communication, collaboration. Then it has an explanation of the knowledge and skills statement, and then the student is expected to. It's always the same all the way down. So even down here in technology operations and concepts, you have the strand, you have the knowledge and skills statement, follows that, followed by the beginning of the student expectations. It's always, always the same. It's never going to change. And so that's the way the TEKS are always set up. So that's how the knowledge and skills statements are always formatted. So you can see just by looking at those that they have a very, very similar format. Okay. So let's look at the knowledge and skill statements. What I did here is I pulled out some the 3rd and 5th grade one, an example, 3rd and 5th grade one, for all the critical thinking. So you can see here that in 3rd and 5th grade, the critical thinking, problem solving, decision making, that's the strand. The student researches and evaluates projects using digital tools and resources. That's the knowledge and skills statement. Then the student is expected to. The 3 and 5 and the K through 2, those knowledge and skill statements are exactly the same. They're always going to be the same. The 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade ones, they're different. You notice that they're a little bit different than the elementary ones. So the 6th grade strands, the 6th grade knowledge and skill statements, the 8th grade knowledge and skill statements, the 7th grade knowledge and skill statements are different than the elementary ones. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is that the state of Texas wants us to realize that what we're teaching at the elementary level is completely different for technology than what we should be teaching at the middle school level. And so these things line up one on top of each other. What they're doing in kindergarten is different than what they're doing in 5th grade. What they're doing in 5th grade is different than what they're doing in middle school. So we can't use the excuse, and we can't say, well, you know what, we're going to push all of that off until middle school. We're going to just push it all off and let the middle schools worry about it. We can't do that anymore because the student expectations, those knowledge and skill statements, are actually different for each grade level. Okay, so let's look at the student expectations. What are student expectations? Student expectations are those things that we're asking the students to actually do in class. And again, we're going to find out that these are probably a little vague. Some of these are very vague statements. So let's look at this one. This is again, we're looking at the 3rd through 5th grade TEKS, technology application TEKS. This is strand 4, critical thinking and problem solving. So you see that we have the knowledge and skill statement up at the top, and then what follows underneath the knowledge and skill statement are the exact student expectations, what we're asking the students to do. So you see that in critical thinking and problem solving and decision making in grades 3 through 5, we have 4 student expectations. We have student expectation A, B, C, and D. So, for instance, I'll read that first one. Identify information regarding a problem and explain the steps toward the solution. Notice that these, again, are very, very vague. It doesn't say what the problem is. It doesn't say what the solution is. And there's a reason, again, for that. And the reason is that these are supposed to be intertwined in with our core curricular areas. These expectations, these student expectations, these TEKS are supposed to be part of our core curricular areas. And so they don't say, you're supposed to just do this in technology class. You're not supposed to do, you're supposed to do this just when you go to the computer lab. These are things that students are supposed to do throughout their their academic career. And so in all grade levels, in all classes, especially our core curricular classes. So if we go back to that, you can see that the knowledge and skill statement is always at the top, and then we always follow that by our student expectations. So this is an example, but it's a good example because every single one of these is exactly the same format. Not exactly the same, but exactly the same format. So TEKS number 3 would have its knowledge and skill statement followed by however many student expectations are in TEKS number 3. TEKS number 2, TEKS number 1, all the way through the 6 strands. Remember, there's 6 strands. Each strand has its own knowledge and skill statement. Each strand has its own student expectations. So, how many student expectations are there? Well, we went through and counted them. And in grades K through 2, there are 26 student expectations. 3 through 5, there's 29 student expectations. And 6 through 8, each grade level has 35 student expectations. Now, you would think by looking at grades 6 through 8 that since each one has 35 student expectations, that they're the exact same expectations, and that's not the case. They're actually different expectations at each grade level. It just so happens, probably by coincidence, that there's 35 at each grade level. And so you notice that at our primary grades, we start off with the least number of student expectations down at 26. Then by the time we get to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we have 35 student expectations. So by the time we get up into middle school, our students are actually learning a few more student expectations. Now, most of our core curricular teachers will say, oh, that's nothing. You should look at my English language arts student expectations. I've got them up in the 100. My science expectations, I've got 100. I understand that. And so remember that these expectations are not expectations by themselves. These expectations, again, are to be intertwined in with your core curricular student expectations. So when you're doing problem solving in science, you want to come back to the technology application TEKS and say, well, what did they say about problem solving? What can we do about problem solving here using technology? When we're talking about communication and writing in our English language arts TEKS, we come back to our technology TEKS and we say, where does it say communication in our technology application TEKS? That's why there's not so many technology application TEKS, because it's not something to be isolated away from itself. These are to be intertwined in with our other core curricular areas. So that's the student expectations. Notice that when you're looking at your student expectations, they always have a verb associated with them. So at the end of that knowledge and skills statement, it always says the student is expected to, and then I just pulled out a few of the verbs. These aren't certainly all of them. These are a few of the verbs. Look what it's asking our students to do: create, analyze, use, identify, collaborate, respect, practice, validate, collect, perform. It's asking our students to do a verb, and so the students actually have something that they're asked to do as part of the student expectation. There's not a student expectation in the whole lot that doesn't start with a verb. And so the student expectation, remember, it's the students doing something. It's not the teacher doing something and the students watching. It's actually the students doing something. So if you're in a class and you're demonstrating technology to the students, and the students are just sitting in their seats watching you do technology, you're not meeting the student expectations. You're not meeting the needs of the TEKS. The TEKS are asking the students to do these things. So these are all student expectations. Now I know that all of our teachers are looking at me going, we all know that. Everybody's told us that. But sometimes it's easier to demonstrate technology than to have our students do it. And so what we want to do is make sure that our students are doing technology. And so these student expectations have associated verbs, and that's a good way of seeing which are the student expectations. There's a verb related to it. Okay, so let's talk about the including statements. We've already covered the knowledge and skills statement. We've talked about the introduction. We've talked about student expectations. Let's talk about the including statement. The including statement is something that has to be mastered by the students. That's the non-negotiable of the TEKS. Now, there's not a lot of including statements, but there are some things that have to be mastered by the students. And again, since this part has to be mastered by the students, it's a non-negotiable. There's no way we can explain not doing that, because this is part of the TEKS, that the TEKS specifically say the students have to learn this particular thing. So how do you find an including statement? It's pretty easy. You go through the TEKS and you find the word including, and it says including, and that's the way to tell if it's an including statement. So let's look at a sample including statement. This, again, we're looking at the grades 3 through 5 TEKS. Look at this one. B, use font attributes, color, white space, and graphics to ensure that products are appropriate for multiple communication media, including monitor, display, web, and print. So that's saying that our students have to understand how to use fonts, white space, graphics when they're working on a monitor, when they're creating something for the web, or they're creating something for print. So just by that including statement right there, 3 through 5th grade, that including statement says our students are expected to make things that show up on screens, to make things that show up on the web, and to make things that show up into print. That's a non-negotiable. So we're actually asking our students to create things for the web at the 3rd grade level. So again, it's one of those things that we can't push back to middle school. By 3rd grade, that 3 through 5 TEK, they're actually asking them to create stuff for a monitor like this here that I have this monitor, for print, and for the web. So some of you teachers are like, oh, I don't know how to make stuff for the web. It's real easy. We'll show you how to do it. Another one here, another example including statement. is demonstrating understanding of technology concepts, including terminology for operating systems, network systems, virtual systems, learning systems appropriate for grades 3 through 5. So again, this is a 3 through 5th grade including statement. But when you look at that TEK, you say to yourself, well, that's not a whole lot, look at that. But like the TEK above it, like that student expectation above it, there's a lot written into that. It's asking our students to use the terminology that's appropriate for operating systems. File, save, print, drag and drop. Those are the kind of things, that terms that you use in operating systems. Boot up, turn off, you know, those are all things that have to do with operating systems. Network systems. How do you log onto a network? How do you connect a printer? Those are all things that we're asking students to learn how to do at the 3rd and 5th grade level. And this actually even goes back down to the 2nd grade level. And for sure, these students are actually have that knowledge by the time they get into middle school. Virtual systems. How can students, what are some of that terminology that students use in virtual systems, like connecting virtually to other campuses, using video conferencing, things like that. Learning systems appropriate for grades 3 through 5. So even though it's just a sentence and even though it looks innocuous enough, it's got a lot of punch behind it. There's a lot of information that goes with those particular including statements. So an including statement, even though it might be very short, it might just be a few words long, it's got a lot of information behind it. So that's an example including statement. Here's a way to look at some including statements. I just took some out and then underlined it. So look at that. Discuss and use various search strategies, including keywords and Boolean operators. Wow, that's a term that most people don't even know. It's a Boolean operator. Guess what? That's in our 3rd through 5th grade TEKS. I think it's also down in our kindergarten TEKS. So what's a Boolean operator? So those are things that if our teachers don't understand, our students definitely don't understand. And so we're going to have to do some professional development on how to do search strategies for sure. Look at that one. Understand copyright principles, including current laws, fair use, Creative Commons, open source, public domain. Those are all including statements. So just in that letter A there, students have to know copyright laws. They have to understand how to use fair use. They have to understand what Creative Commons is. That's part of they have to master what Creative Commons is. And so if some of these terms are foreign or unusual, that's the kind of things that we have to couch our staff development around, are those terms that we may not be familiar with. For instance, we may not understand what open source means. So we have to tell our teachers, we have to in-service our teachers on what open source is. So you can see that there's quite a few including statements, but while there might not be a lot of including statements, so like each student expectation may not have an including statement with it, the including statements they're kind of like a box that looks like there's nothing in it, but when you open it up, it does have a lot in it. The including statements are very, very, very interesting. They have lots of stuff inside of them. So that's what an including statement is. That's how you find an including statement. Now in 6th through 8th grade, they have some very interesting including statements, some ones that are like, they go crazy wild. So I pulled this out just because the 6th through 8th grade ones are a little, there's some including statements that are a little bit different. For instance, in this one, where I think this is in the strand 6, which is the basic operations strand. If you look at it in number L, if you look at it in student expectation, or the TEK L, there are 4 sub-including statements. So if you look at that including statement, there's 4 things that the students are expected to do in middle school in just one including statement, and they're not particularly easy things to do. Look at that. Essentially, they're asking students to do word processing, spreadsheets, databases, and creating digital publications. So those aren't just real basic things. So, I mean, you could get really into word processing, how to do a spreadsheet, databases, and digital publications. How do you get students to create these digital publications? This is pulled right out of the 6th grade TEKS. So you can see that an including statement can be very simple, like we saw previously. It's just a a sentence or a word or phrase right after the word including, or like this one right here, it can have quite a bit of information in it. Just to let you know again, just a reminder that the including statements are all very, very, they've got a lot of information behind them, even though they may appear to be very simple. And so when you start thinking about what an including statement is, it's pretty complicated. So when you look at those including statements, don't just like skip over them. Oh, word processing, that's an easy thing. Ah, spreadsheet, that's an easy thing to do. Okay, it's word processing, but it's word processing including digital typography, standards such as page layout, font formatting, paragraph formatting, list attributes. Those are all part of word processing. It's not just turning on a word processor and start typing. It's actually formatting that text and how to print it out and all that kind of stuff. So you can see that including statements can be very, very complicated. Again, I want to, I love this picture. Including statements must be mastered. Those are the things that must be mastered. And that comes right out of the introductory introductory paragraphs on our TEKS. Including statements are those things that have to be mastered by our students. Now, of course, we want them to master all of our technology application TEKS, but the including statements are the ones that really, really have to be mastered. Those are the ones that there's no negotiation about. So, what did we just cover? We covered a lot in just a very short period of time. We covered the introduction statements, what the introduction looks like. We talked about the strands. What are those 6 strands? We talked about those earlier. We actually had a whole segment just on the strands. We talked about our knowledge and skills statements, how they're formatted. They start off with what the strand is, then they talk about the very vague knowledge and skills statements, and then they followed up, they always end with the student is expected to. And then in each TEK, we're followed by the student expectations and the number of expectations in each one of our grade levels. And then finally, we talked about the including statements. What are those including statements? Those are those non-negotiable statements that the students must learn as part of the technology application TEKS. So that's our segment on the new technology application TEKS, how to read a TEK. What's cool about this is that if you understand how to read the technology application TEKS, you've also understood how to read the math TEKS. You've also understood how to read the science TEKS. You've also understood how to read the English language arts TEKS, because all the TEKS are formatted in a very, very similar way. So that's how you read the TEKS. That's how you read the new technology application TEKS. Thank you for joining me for this segment of Digital Discoveries, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Digital Discoveries. Please visit our website for more information and our YouTube channel for all other episodes of Digital Discoveries.